You're listening to the Colts Blue Zone Podcast with Mike Chappell and Dave Griffiths.
Inside the Fox 59 CBS 4 podcast studio, welcome to the Colts Blue Zone Podcast alongside Matt Adams and Mike Chappell. I'm Dave Griffiths. Appreciate having you all in along for the ride and sticking with us through last week when I couldn't stick with you. I was just so broken up by the Colts season being over. I couldn't make it into the office that day to do the podcast. And I had strep throat, so I didn't want to.
I just put a black armband in and came to work, so we handled things differently.
You do, you absolutely did. But glad to be here with you all, chatting a little off-season football. Wish we were still talking playoffs, of course, and it's been the first week of the playoffs. I thought was really great. It was very interesting. The Texans still moving on. AFC South representing. If you want to be AFC South, big fans there. And I think there's part of you that's like that, but I think a big part is also the rival, of course, and I wanted to say that like I find C.J. Stroud and D'Amico Ryans very likable, which is bad if you want to hate them. If you're a Colts fan, you want to hate your rivals. Like they actually have an unfortunate, very likable quarterback and head coach.
I'm in the same boat. Of course, one of my coworkers is from Texas, so he's a Houston fan. So we had a little bit of friendly rivalry, throughout the season. But I told this to Chap last week. I'm just like, I like C.J. Stroud so much. I would not have been broken up one bit if he ended up as an Indianapolis Colts uniform.
Right.
And they're kind of the underdogs here, and I'm kind of pulling for him, which it doesn't really make sense because I'm a Colts fan, and this should be the Colts in this situation, or it could very well be the Colts in this situation.
Right, very much.
Well, then you balance that by just taking great pleasure from Jacksonville's nosedive.
Exactly.
Very true.
Yes.
So, and part of me thought that was kind of fun to watch.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
So, but yeah, it's and we talked about this, it just shows where the AFC South is probably going to be for the next, 6-10 years. Mm-hmm. Very good.
Mm-hmm. It's still not as bad as the Eagles collapse down the stretch. My Eagles.
Oh, man, my condolences on that.
Thank you. Losing 5 of the last 6. But again, mitigated by the fact that the Dallas Cowboys, once again, collapsed in the playoffs. So we've got that going for us.
Eagles were worse. That's worse.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Eagles was worse.
Down the stretch, it was worse. But, yeah.
The last game. I mean, you're playing for your season.
They're awful.
You're given a chance to atone for all the last 6 weeks, and you just gosh, it's awful.
Can't do it. I'm not getting into the Eagles because I could talk for an hour on the disaster that was.
This is Colts Blue Zone, not the Eagles.
Exactly.
Do you think Sirianni survives?
I think so, yeah. I think he survives. It depends on what happens halfway through next year, through 8 games.
It depends on what he says to the owner.
There's part of it, I'll say this and then I promise I'll stop. Like it kind of reminds me of what happened back in 2020 when everything blew up with Doug Peterson and Carson Wentz. Because, they had just won the Super Bowl, and then a couple years later, they're still in the playoffs. They made the playoffs, but things were unraveling. You could see Peterson gone, Wentz gone. Obviously, Jalen Hurts did not have the same season this year he had last year. Sirianni, maybe the luster is off a little bit. But anyway, like I said, no more. I promise. I'm not talking any more about that.
Okay, good transition. What a lot of analysts pointed out is how much did losing Shane Steichen impact that team,
Absolutely.
Certainly offensively.
And again, looking back then, they always talked about how much losing Frank Reich impacted that team.
Right.
Again, there are a lot of similarities between what happened then and what's happening now. And you can absolutely make the argument that losing Shane Steichen was a big deal for that team. And I think Colts fans are very happy to have him here for a team that certainly surpassed expectations, for an offense that was still a top 10 offense at the end of the day in the NFL, even though you lost your quarterback and you were on Gardner Minshew for the entire season, and your best player was out for 7 games. You only played 10 games.
Didn't
Jonathan
start the
Taylor.
season with them, and then he had that stint
and
in the middle.
Shaq Leonard was virtually a non-factor the entire season.
All these things, Colts fans should be thrilled right now for what they have moving forward. Not thrilled that they're not playing, obviously, but thrilled looking ahead. I think, at the future, and a very solid foundation to build on. It does not take away the sting of this year and how things ended in that last game of the season, which you guys broke down plenty last week, so we don't need to really dive headfirst into all that. But we begin looking forward now, and that should be wrapped in and presented with plenty of optimism for what's going to happen. Even as you look around and the NFL playoffs are still going on, the Packers are looking for another upset against San Francisco. The Texans are playing the Ravens, seeing if they can do what the Colts did earlier this year and pull the upset in Baltimore over them. Bucks, Lions, that'll be I'm thrilled to see the Lions and to see the success that they've had. It's funny, like you look back at what like all those things that Dan Campbell has said, like in speeches to his team that have made it out onto Twitter or onto social media, wherever, and people laugh at him. Well, who's laughing now?
He's one of the last 8 teams there.
He is, and they've had a very good season, and Jared Goff is having a career resurgence there. Chiefs, Bills, once again, Mahomes and Allen in the playoffs. It's turning into the new Brady Manning. It really is. Those two guys, every year it seems like they're going to meet each other. Of course, Joe Burrow, I think, is going to have something to say about that and inserting his name into the mix there as well in that group over the next, 5, 10, however many years that they're all with those teams. There's no evidence to say that they're going to go anywhere else anytime soon. So it's been a good first round, wild card round of the playoffs. Anticipating a good divisional round coming up this weekend. Before we get into kind of a Colts wrap-up and look ahead, there is one piece of very important news in terms of Indianapolis Colts football this week that we will mention and speak about briefly. Is that just the other week, the Colts announced that Jim Irsay was battling a severe respiratory illness. He was in the hospital receiving treatment. And they asked the standard that please respect him, his privacy at this time. Now, since then, it has been revealed first on TMZ and then second on our very own Fox 59 CBS4. Very much big credit to our reporter Max Lewis for being on this story. That Carmel police had found Jim Irsay unresponsive in his home in Carmel back on December 8th. And they had administered Narcan, and that was a whole issue back then. These two appear like separate problems because Jim Irsay was at the Colts-Steelers game on December 16th, 1 week after that incident. Now he is back in the hospital. Like I said, the Colts announced saying he has a severe respiratory illness at this time. And in an updated statement sent out yesterday after the news broke of that other incident back on December 8th when Irsay was found unresponsive, the Colts said that Jim Irsay is still recovering from the respiratory illness, and they did not comment on the December 8th incident.
Privacy for Jim and his family.
Exactly,
at this time.
which you're always going to get, and this is not obviously. I'll say the obvious. They're under no obligation to say exactly what's happening here. This isn't like an NFL injury report where teams are obligated to say exactly what's happening with their players. But Mike Chappell, this was an incident that brought once again Jim Irsay's private life into the limelight, and also some health-related issues for your team owner. Also, kind of puts the entire future of the franchise and where it's going and who's in charge, kind of at the center of the story as we are right now.
Yeah, first thing with the December 8th incident, that just confirms what those of us who know Jimmy, and I've known him since '84, I consider him a friend. He has demons. He just does. And there are times that the demons get the better of him, as they do with a lot of people. And this was one of them. And whether the second incident is similar, I don't know. And that's something that if other people want to speculate, they can. But yeah, as far as how this impacts the team, initially it doesn't. They have. I'm just convinced that these are smart people, and they have made contingency plans for whatever, whether it's Jim running the franchise for another 10, 15 years, whether it's for the daughters to ease into control, whatever. They have made these plans. There are pieces in place. The bottom line is right now you're hoping that Jim Irsay can get control of the demons, can come through this and be back at the complex.
There's part of me that would like to see Jim Irsay be forthright when this is over about what's going on. Like I said, he doesn't have to be. There's no reason that he has to be. But what the Colts have done over the previous years about kicking the stigma and putting that very much in the forefront of Jim Irsay's public persona. I think it could go a long way, some openness about what exactly is going on, Matt. But like I said, no obligation to do that. I think all of us are hoping, and those of us who pray are praying that he comes through this and is okay on the other side. He's able to come back, and if you're a Colts fan, see the Indianapolis Colts do exactly what they hope to do in the next 4 or 5 years. And he always talks about multiple Lombardis. If you're a Colts fan, you'd love to see him once again up on that stage, obviously. But right now, his health being at the very center of, like I said, whatever. His health is of most importance right now and getting back to that point.
Well, and he has been open in the past, sometimes a little bit too open about things that are going on in his life, sometimes to his credit, sometimes to his detriment. But kicking the stigma has been such an important force for that franchise over the last couple of years since they launched that initiative. And I think if he's able to, and he's able to come to terms with that and talk about it, I think that only strengthens the initiative that, nobody is 100% fixed all the time. We all have our struggles, and it would be good for him to share that if he's able to.
Chap, as you look toward the future of the Colts and transitioning from one owner to another, I think that will become a topic of discussion. You see it in other franchises here and there, franchises that aren't sold, obviously. The long-term franchise in the NFL, the Rooneys, the Maras, the Hunts that have passed it down from one person to the next and yield control to the next generation. Do you think that, like we've seen, it's been Carly Irsay down on the sideline. Like she has a headset on during games. She's got her little notepad. She's going back and forth. I don't know exactly what she's taking notes on or what she's listening to, but she has been in a point where she's been trying to understand more about the ins and goings on, I think is the best way to put it, about the franchise. You've seen it obviously in recent years with her presence on the sideline. Kalen has been in front of the cameras for either kicking the stigma or other different more public relations events that the Colts go on. Casey has been kind of off the beaten path. It's been the other two that have been in front of the camera or been kind of in that, had more of a role in team activities. It should be obvious that in some form or fashion, those three are going to be in charge whenever it is that Jim Irsay steps away, right?
Yeah, and again, I think Carly's the one. She's been at league meetings. She's sort of done what her dad did when he learned from the bottom up. Picking up jock straps and doing all this as a young kid. I don't think she's gone that far.
Quite that far, no.
But it's learning all the ins and outs. And like I say, at least initially, I don't think this situation, providing he gets better, as we all hope and pray he does, this isn't, I don't think, an issue right now in the operational, because it right now Chris Ballard is sort of steering the ship with the daughter's input, obviously.
Right.
If things take a turn for the worse, then we have to consider how they divide up the responsibilities.
Right.
Whether one of them is more community, one of them is more hands-on with the franchise. Again, I think it's very, very clear that Jim Irsay has total confidence in Chris Ballard, without question. Do the daughters? I don't know. So we'll see how that goes. But again, I just know in my heart that because of Jim's history and his struggles, they have plans in place. Whatever those plans are, they have contingency plans on a succession, for lack of a better word. Again, these are smart people. They know what they're doing. So while a lot of us outsiders saying what's going to happen if this happens, these people know what's going to happen.
So all the best to Jim Irsay right now. Our hopes, our prayers with him, his family, and obviously we on the Colts Blue Zone will provide updates as it goes on into the future. And you can read online, fox59.com, cbs4indy.com. Follow Mike Chappell on Twitter at mchappell51. And that's all we have to say about that for the present time. So it brings us into kind of a recap of the Colts season and our look ahead. We've got some free agents, obviously, that we're going to get to that in a little bit, and we'll talk about just top priorities and who's must sign, not must sign, all that stuff. Guys who probably won't be here in the future, of all that big list. But you run down what the Colts were able to accomplish this year. And like I said, the final offensive ranking being 10th in the NFL, scoring 23.3 points per game, tied with Cleveland. All of us, you're shaking your head right now.
I cannot. I mean, and we saw this happen during the season. They had that stretch. They'd scored 20 points in at least so many games and all that. I still cannot believe the final number there. That they're tied, but they're still top 10 scoring in the league. And when you look at what they had to go through on the field, losing their quarterback. JT being banged up, and then sometimes that unit just not looking very good sometimes. Mm-hmm. Just a credit, I think, to the coaching staff.
Chap, I think there were hills and valleys, certainly, during this season. And it is a credit, as Matt said, to the coaching staff and Shane Steichen in his first year, not getting caught up in the valley. An unprepared or a not good head coach would, at the beginning you have your peak maybe with some good performances. Then you saw the offense really struggling in games against Carolina and the Panthers, and I think and the Patriots is what I was going to say. Yeah, exactly. Carolina and the Panthers and the Patriots, but a couple games where there was really some doldrums, and they were able to win those games, and I think that helped them pull out the other side and really kind of get a little bit more going down the stretch. But this was a team that was able to keep some level of quality throughout the entire season amid the peaks and valleys at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that's just, it has to fall at Shane Steichen's desk. It just does. We sort of roll our eyes sometimes when he gives us his non-answers during media availability.
Right.
But his message was delivered and received by the team. And I don't know that you would want a coach who is on the highs and lows of a season. It would drive your team crazy. You've got to see the leadership. He showed that. That includes Jim Bob, and it includes Gus Bradley to some level because, there's more issues on defense than there is offense. But the head coach sets the tone. He meets the team, early in the week and at the end of the week, and you've got to draw your direction from him, and they did.
The Colts were 10th in the NFL in rushing this year, averaging 121 yards per game. Zach Moss ended up their leading rusher at the end of the year with 794 yards. In 14 games played, averaged 4.3 yards per carry, scored 5 touchdowns. Jonathan Taylor, in 10 games played, scored 7 touchdowns and ran for 741 yards. And over a course of a 17-game season, if you're curious, that's about 1,250 rushing yards per game. So that was the pace he was on, averaging about 70, 75 yards per game in those games that he played. And there were a couple games, remember, that he played where he was very much limited.
Yeah, absolutely.
Early on when they were easing him in. The Tennessee game, I think, was when he came back.
Yep, just had a handful of carries. They had a couple of design things they were doing with him, and that's about all they could get because they were concerned about, conditioning and integrating him into the offense and all that stuff.
And all that to say, he had a grand total of 1 snap there with Anthony Richardson in the backfield.
3-yard run.
There it goes, 3-yard run.
I still see it.
Yes, in your head, it's burned in there in the back of the retinas. But Richardson himself, 7 touchdowns he scored in 4 games. 4 of them were in rushing. By the way, 4 touchdowns. So he played in 4 games, scored 4 rushing touchdowns. Which the leaders in the NFL among quarterbacks this year were both Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. They each had 16 rushing touchdowns this year, I believe. So that's your pace of basically 1 rushing touchdown per game, and that's what Anthony Richardson was on early in the year.
Franchise record's 5.
Well, I think that he's going to beat that if he stays healthy.
Yes, there you go.
Knock on wood in the future. But that was obviously a topic of conversation, and you guys broke some of that down last week with the postseason press conferences with Anthony Richardson, with Chris Ballard, about changing play style and what exactly needs to change with Anthony Richardson. I got the sense from both Ballard and Richardson especially that we are not going to see too much different in terms of play calls, in terms of style of quarterback play with Anthony Richardson in the future, in spite of the fact that in the 4 games he played, he only finished 1 of them this year. They still want Richardson to use his legs, and that's one of the main reasons, Chap, that they drafted him, because he's that dynamic with that.
They didn't draft him, and then he gets out there in camp, and they say, holy smokes, we didn't know he could do that. No, that's why you drafted him. The thing I got is be smarter. I really thought the only injury that should have been avoided was a concussion.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Run through the tape.
Run through it, and then you don't. you don't have contact with the defender, then you don't get bowled over, you don't hit your head, and all that stuff. And then you probably don't have him get concussed during that game.
Right.
He's able to stay around.
Yeah, some of the other ones were more like they were unfortunate injuries for sure. And he talked about it, slamming his knee against the turf week 1 against Jacksonville. And also the Indianapolis Colts turf is changing.
Is notoriously not great over
exactly. The slit fill turf is there's only a couple stadiums in the NFL who have it, and the Colts are getting rid of it this offseason and updating it to a more friendly turf for the players. Not that any players on this roster ever complained about this last turf; they would complain about other turf. I'm reminded of Zaire Franklin. When this was a topic, Matt, early in the year about turf and injuries and all that stuff, and they were talking about the turf at MetLife Stadium in New York, which is notoriously
probably worse than the league.
Probably the worst in the league. And Zaire, playing at Syracuse University back in college, played, I think, 1 or 2 games there, like bowl games, at MetLife Stadium. And his quote was hilarious. It was, "Even in college, we knew that bleep, some word that begins with S, was bleep, a word that begins with A." Like, that was his quote. We knew that S was A. Like, even in college, they knew how bad that turf was.
Yeah, I love Zaire.
Oh, he's the best.
The best.
Yes, absolutely the best. And I think he would deserve every year to be an awardee of the media. I forget exactly what we call it, but we always give an award to a player at the end of each season for openness with the media and just easy to work with. Michael Pittman Jr. won it this year, and certainly to his credit, I don't know. Well, he had plenty of opportunity this year to have some chances with the media. He was always forthright with us. And the one instance where after the one game where he complained about his role and then immediately called everyone over, was like, look, okay, this got blown out of proportion, sort of. Well, not really that, but I said something that I should have said differently, and I didn't handle it well, blah, blah, blah. So, and Pitt's always honest with us and pretty open when he's there. There are sometimes post-game after a loss where he doesn't want to talk to anybody, and you know it because of his just his personality, his competitiveness. Like, he gets mad after losses.
And he knows that if he addresses the media, then he will probably say something that he will very much regret.
Right, but that time he regretted it, and he was the bigger man afterward and called everyone over. It was like, look, I was wrong here, and that's not how I should have spoken, and I am a big part of this offense.
Obviously,
yes.
It's at career highs in catches and yards, I believe, this year.
Very much so. Career high in catches and yards. Had 4 touchdowns. He still did score, I believe it was 7 touchdowns. I think he had like 6 receiving touchdowns and 1 rushing touchdown back in 2021. And of course, that year he had more yards per reception and all that stuff. But yeah, he had, in terms of just yards and receptions, was his most productive season there in his 4 years now in the NFL. We go on to further players in the receiving. Josh Downs is a rookie, 68 catches. That's great for a rookie. That's really good, especially for a third-round rookie. 771 yards, 2 touchdowns. Downs showed a little bit of explosion, too. He showed that he can get downfield and make some plays there. That's not going to be his typical MO, but when you have it in your bag, that's beneficial, Matt, because we've been talking for a couple years now, 2 years, about Alec Pierce, and I think he's a great deep ball receiver, like a really, really good one, and you love to see, you want that on your team. I think we're still, like, you still want more from Pierce in terms of the shorter stuff, and I think Josh Downs already has a little bit more of the Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, a little more versatility, which is what a Swiss Army knife would be. Thank you for the thesaurus there, Matt. But.
Yes. So then Alec Pierce, 32 catches and 514 yards this year, 2 touchdowns. Certainly the big play threat. And with only 32 catches, I think he was certainly limited in what he could do after Anthony Richardson went down and Gardner Minshew took over. Minshew, like, he can throw deep like other quarterbacks in the NFL. Like, the knock on Chad Pennington for years was he wasn't a deep ball thrower for the Jets or the Dolphins or wherever he was playing. But you could still throw deep from time to time and get the ball downfield, but it's just not your strength.
Right. It's not that automatic, like, Anthony Richardson, when we saw him, it was just that flick of the wrist.
Yeah.
And then the ball just sails, and Gardner, you got to scheme it up a little bit more, and if it's not there, he's just going to check it down.
Right.
And that's fine. I mean, that's what you do. One thing that did strike me with Pierce this year is, the yardage isn't there, and the catches necessarily aren't there, but I do feel that this season he had an impact on games that we didn't necessarily see last year. Like, he was getting past guys in the secondary. Sometimes he'd get the ball, sometimes he wouldn't.
Right.
Other times he would draw flags. There were 3 or 4 occasions I can remember this year where he did blow past a guy. They grabbed him. Colts got a big play out of it based on penalty yardage, which does not appear obviously under Alec Pierce's statistics, but it has an impact on the game.
And the more effective he is down the field, the more it's going to open up stuff shorter in the field for either Pittman or Josh Downs. Like, you see him running go route after go route after go route, and it can be frustrating for him and for fans, even if they see him, if they're there at the stadium, they see him maybe get open. Or get close to enough to open, and he doesn't get the ball as much. He's still having an impact on the game because, like, when the ball comes to him, he catches it a good portion of the time, and defenses have got to be wary of that. They can't let him go, and especially when Anthony Richardson comes back and is more of a threat, I think, on a play-to-play basis.
I'm just not quite ready to write the guy off as a bust yet, because we need some continuity in the quarterback's room. We need a little bit of that before you can say, hey, maybe this isn't the guy that we should have picked a couple years ago.
Yeah, and as you go forward, you hope that he takes just another step, and he gets a little bit more of that the short across the field, maybe some more crossing routes to try to hit him in stride and see if you can get him going for in that way, or if he can become more of if he's more of a deep threat, like if he becomes more of a guy that's kind of like. I compare him to maybe an Anquan Bolden or a Ricky Prohl type receiver who can get that 15, 20-yard in route or out route there. Like you get people are so worried about you just keeping on running that at 15, 20 yards, you stop.
Right.
And then, exactly. And then you get that hit. And we saw that with, I think, Nico Collins for the Texans was that this year. Like, he could do that brilliantly. And you need the quarterback to get him the ball at that point. And C.J. Stroud absolutely did that. He got them on those 15, 20-yard in routes. And we saw that just in the 2 games that the Colts played against them, that he was very effective in that area. And I think Alec Pierce can be that if, again, he takes that next step, I think, in his development. And you have a quarterback who can throw it like a rocket and get that ball on the 15, 20-yard in route, out route. So yeah, that I think that's the next thing you want to see from Alec Pierce and his development. And you talk about tight end as well. Kylan Granson led tight ends with 30 catches for 368 yards. Drew Ogletree had his first career touchdown, but obviously his future is very much in limbo right now with his legal issues here in central Indiana. To be determined what he's going to be in the future with the Colts. Will Mallory had some promise in his rookie year. I think showed that he's a pretty good receiving tight end, and Chris Ballard talked about that in his postseason press conference. And then Jelani Woods, a completely lost season and a entirely disappointing season here, his second year in Indianapolis, to not even see the field, to have a hamstring problem at the start of the year, and then to be working his way back, and to have his other hamstring give out on him and just miss the entire season. I think one of the biggest disappointments this year, Matt, has to be Jelani Woods and the fact that you did not see any of him, and he could not try to take the next step in his development as a guy who's a unicorn of a tight end, a huge guy, a fast guy, an athletic guy that you saw glimpses of in his rookie year, but just could not get on the field here in the first year with Shane Steichen as head coach.
And we know that hamstring injuries can linger, but we thought that it had been enough time that this was eventually going to get right. And it just, it seemed like the one hamstring got right, but then the other one, he pulled it, and he just could not get things back on track. And you're right, lost season and just a real shame.
Offensive line for the Colts, I think had a massive bounce back season. Last year in 2022, that was one of the weakest parts of the team. And for how much you had, if you're the Colts, invested in that area, the biggest disappointment of the year. This season, I think, was a top 10 unit in the NFL. And Quentin Nelson, once again a Pro Bowler, a deserved Pro Bowler this time. You could argue, unlike last year. Offensive line, sometimes you get just in there by the basis of your name.
Yeah, people are like, oh, guards. Oh, Quentin Nelson.
Exactly.
I've heard of that guy.
Yeah, so you put him
He's
in
pretty
there.
good, I think, yeah.
And he, to be fair, a bad year for Quentin Nelson is still better than probably half the NFL, at least. And then Ryan Kelly, I thought, had a bounce-back year. And he said that he seems to indicate that he wants to keep playing in spite of internet rumors that he was thinking about retirement. Seemed very much to say that he didn't know.
Seemed pretty salty about that
exactly
whole thing too, which
you like to hear.
Which you like to hear, exactly, and especially from Kelly. So
right tackle Braden Smith had a very good season when he played, and really fought through some that knee injury, which was, I think, worse than a lot of people realized. And he spent 4 weeks on the bench there before coming back and playing the last couple weeks and not being completely right in those games at all, but still played well and well enough. And I mean, he was on T.J. Watt in that Steelers game and played really well against him. Watt did not do all that much in that game.
He had like one play early, and then
exactly
that was it.
Yes, had a strong start, but then nothing after that. So anyway, offensive line appears to be kind of settled a bit, and Bernhard Raimann, you have a guy that you can think right now, Matt, that there was a series of a couple years after Anthony Costanzo retired when you're like, okay, who's the left tackle going to be? Do you have it? Do you have it? Do you have it? And I think as we're in this offseason now, that's not a question anymore. It's like, this is the guy that we think is our left tackle of the future. Now it's about seeing him continue to take steps from year to year. It's not about, is this the guy? It's about, he is the guy. Now you hope he just continues to get better as a young player.
You just want to see him add some more stuff to his game, pick up maybe a little bit more strength, that type of stuff, things that are part of the development of a player. But I think Bernhard Raimann got himself paid this year, especially if he's able to follow that up with another solid year next season.
Yep. So for him as a third or fourth round pick, wherever he was, I forget exactly off the top of my head. I think a third round pick.
Third round.
Yeah. So you get a 4-year contract as a rookie. So you've played 2 of them, and then you have 1 more next year, and then you're eligible for an extension after that when you're going into your final year of your contract. And it's what we saw from Jonathan Taylor. That was less than fun. It was what we saw from Shaq Leonard. As well back in 2021 before that season when he got his deal going into that final year of his 4-year rookie deal. And so that's kind of pushed off into the future for Raimann, but for now, entering his 3rd year now, that seems to be set. And Will Fries, I think, was better than he was in his than 2 years ago. He kind of solidified himself as a reliable guard there, not Pro Bowl caliber, I don't think, but starting guard level in the NFL.
Hey, man, it's like we talked about last year. Well, not really last year, but like if they could have just had some competent play at the offensive line last year, then maybe things were a little bit different. This year, they got that, and yeah, it was 9-8. They missed the playoffs. They had a chance and everything, but it just a completely different vibe from the team and the offensive line this year.
Y'all may have noticed that Mike Chappell is no longer talking, and that's because he had to step out for a bit. So Matt and I are going to take us to the finish here on the Colts Blue Zone podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at Colts Blue Zone as well for news and notes throughout the week for major updates that could happen over the coming days and over the offseason, whenever it might be. But let's switch over to the defensive side of the ball and what the Colts were able to establish this year, or what they're going to look like moving forward. Tackles, obviously, Zaire Franklin set for the 2nd year in a row the franchise record for 179 tackles, which was 2nd in the NFL behind only Bobby Wagner of the Seahawks, who had 183. And Zaire played only in 16 games instead of 17 games as well. E.J. Speed cracked 100 at 102 tackles. Kenny Moore with 93 tackles. That's very expected. I think all of those guys. You have your 2 linebackers, like your main tackling guys, and then Kenny Moore, your nickel corner, who is playing in the middle of the field
and really
so
good
much.
Usually in run support.
Right.
And so you would expect Kenny to rack up some tackles.
Those are probably the 3 players that you want to be your leading tacklers if you're the Colts, honestly. You might like to see maybe a defensive lineman in there as well, maybe over Kenny Moore. I don't know. But for this team and the way they play, you don't want your safeties to be leading tacklers. You certainly don't want your outside corners to be leading tacklers, because that means they're getting burned way too often, and they're trying to play catch up. So those are the 3 guys I think that you want.
The Colts' issue is once guys got past them,
right,
they just
they kept going, yes, and they weren't stopped. So I do think that was a question that was posed to Chris Ballard about the safeties and what he thought about them, their play this year. And first thing he said was that Julian Blackmon had a really good year, and he did have a really good year. Blackmon led the team with 4 interceptions. Kenny Moore had 3. Ronnie Harrison and Rodney Thomas both had 2 each. But outside of what I thought was pretty consistent good play from Blackmon in a contract year, there were very much unreliable play from the other safeties, whether it was Rodney Thomas back there in his second year, maybe a little bit of a sophomore slump from here. And even last year, he was a 7th-round rookie who came in. He was better than expected because he was a 7th-round rookie. But this year, it was just maybe like, okay, this is
leveled off a little bit.
Yes. And after that, you brought in Ronnie Harrison, who played linebacker at the start of the year, and he moved back at the end of the year to safety. Nick Cross, I think they would love to see Nick Cross take a big step forward in his development, but just hasn't done it yet to a consistent level back there. So on the line, Samson Ebukam, the free agent acquisition, led him with 9.5 sacks this year. Kwity Paye had 8.5. Dio Odangbo had 8. DeForest Buckner also had 8. To have 4 guys with 8+ sacks is really good, Matt. But you don't have that guy who's like the 15 to 20 range. And not every team in the NFL has that, to be fair. But even a team like the Houston Texans with Jonathan Grenard, who had 12.5, like that's still a guy who's a little bit more dynamic than what you have. In spite of the, I think, very consistent level of play that you had in terms of getting after the quarterback this year, that is an area that you can look at, whether it's in free agency or in the draft, that you might eyeball and say, that's something from speed rush on the edge that you could look to improve a little bit and make this defense a little bit more dangerous than it was this year.
And sacks by committee are good. And many times they were able to get pressure on guys, but there were also times, very frustrating times, when it was a 3rd and 16 and you needed to get to the quarterback and you had to have that guy to be the guy to get to the quarterback, and instead it's a pass over the top for 20 yards and it's a first down because they couldn't get the pressure.
I was particularly impressed among these guys here with Dio Odangbo. I thought that he
flashed some potential of being that guy.
He did. He did flash potential. He can go inside, outside. I thought he was dynamic, and he probably played I don't know snap counts, but I think he probably played fewer snaps than all of these other guys here. I would have to go back and look at that, but it just felt like that to me. I think he played more toward the end of the year than he did at the beginning of the year. Kwity Paye with 8.5 sacks is very good. Of course, Chris Ballard, when asked if he's going to pick up that 5th-year option for Kwity Paye, was said, I'm not going to tell you that, and gave his little chuckle.
Of course not, Chris.
No, yeah, exactly. So we could ask him, but it was unlikely we were going to get the answer. It's not like
Chap says, you got to ask.
Right, exactly. And you ask that because he's not a 15-sack guy, because then it's obvious. You're going to pick up the 5th-year option.
Yes.
But he's in that range where you really don't know. If he only had 3 sacks this year, it wouldn't be a question either, because you would not be picking up his 5th-year option. But he's in that middle range, like I said. Maybe you do, and the deadline for that is, I believe, in early May 2nd, for picking up options for the first round class of.
If you got some time to think about it, and to Quity's benefit, we did see, I think, some improvement in the pass rush this year. And then on the other hand, he's also solid against the run game, which is a benefit, because not every edge rusher is able to wear both hats.
Right. Very solid against the run. I've made the comparison on this podcast to Jabal Sheard, who is a great run defender.
Not a bad guy to be compared to.
And could get 6 sacks a year. If Kwity is a little bit more dynamic and can get 8 to 10 sacks and is still as good of a run defender, then he's a better player than Jabal Sheard, which Jabal Sheard is a really good NFL player. I mean, he's getting 2nd and 3rd contracts, free agent deals, trying to maybe he doesn't stay with one team, but he's gone from team to team, Sheard has, and has found some good success in different places across the league.
Teams want him. They find a place, and they find a way to use him because he has that utility.
Exactly. And maybe Kwity Paye is that. Maybe the Colts keep him around because they particularly value him. I don't know. But we'll find out by the beginning of May whether they add that 5th-year option, which is a pretty expensive option for defensive ends, because it goes into just how much the top defensive ends in the league make, and that's kind of how that number is determined based on contracts and rookie contracts. So I don't know if they will pick it up, because I don't know if they view him as worth quite that much money if he's not getting the Bosa numbers, the Watt numbers. the Danielle Hunter numbers in terms of sacks. That is the kind of the guys that he would be comped to in terms of his salary for that. So we'll see. I think that's very much, you can make an argument either way for that, but we'll find out about Kwity this offseason. But he's certainly with the Colts next year, absolutely, which would be his 4th year in the NFL, and you expect him to maybe take another step, maybe get to that 10 to 12 sack range next year if he's at 8.5 this year.
That deadline comes before he has a chance to prove that on that 5th-year option. But then, I guess if they decide not to pick it up, he could play for an extension, or I suppose if they don't pick it up, then he's probably just done with the team. But maybe. So I think Ballard is high on Kwity Paye. Yep. I think he's always been high on him since they drafted him. Obviously, he made him a first-round pick. So I wouldn't be surprised if they did. But it does, as you mentioned, come down a lot of it to cost. And they will have to look long-term because there are some guys who are going to have to pay.
Yep. Forced fumbles, Samson Ebukam and E.J. Speed led the team with 3 each. Zaire Franklin, Dio Dengbo, DeForest Buckner, and Kwity Paye each had 2 forced fumbles each themselves. The defense ended the year allowing the 28th most points in the league, which should not be acceptable. 24.4 points per game. Turnovers only +2. If you give up some points and you get a big turnover margin, like if you're +10, +13, that makes it a little bit easier to swallow.
You can live with that. That's kind of your bend but don't break defense.
Right, and the big play type defense. But this team, I don't think was good enough. With 24 takeaways is not bad. Like it's pretty good, honestly.
It's there in the middle, upper middle part of the league.
Right, but if you're going to give up 24 points per game, you would need more turnovers to be a winning football team. So one of those needs to change.
Right.
You either need a more dynamic secondary, or you need a secondary that just is a little bit more consistent, like one or the other, that doesn't give up quite as many big plays, or one that makes more big plays to offset it, so that you give your offense more opportunities at the end of the day. 24th in rushing in the NFL this year, 17th in passing. So I think rushing would be better with a full season of Grover Stewart. And he is, to me, one of the biggest questions this offseason about free agency as an unrestricted free agent. Michael Pittman Jr. is number one. Obviously, I think on everyone who covers the Colts or every Colts fan's list of what exactly is going to happen with him. But Grover Stewart, to me, is number 2, even above Kenny Moore, because I think Grover is a very, very good run defender, and yet you want to be more dynamic on the defensive line. So in the 15 range in the first round, which is where the Colts are going to pick, they might have some options to get more dynamic on the defensive line. And the unfortunate part for the Colts is, they have to make that decision on Grover first. Like, they can't do the draft. Like, the NBA does the draft and then comes free agency. In the NFL, free agency is a whole month and a half before the draft. So you have to make the decision on Grover before you know who exactly you're going to get in the draft. But at 15, there's going to be some options there to get more dynamic on the defensive interior or on the offense in several different ways. And we'll certainly get into that in the coming weeks and months on who possibilities for the Colts.
I just figured they would trade down to 28th and get 2 first-round picks. Or second-round picks.
I don't know why I even look at who's going to be available at 15 with Chris Ballard, the one making the call there. But anyway, when we talk about free agents, the list, you broke it down here, Matt, for us. Michael Pittman, Grover Stewart, Kenny Moore, Tyquan Lewis, Rigo Sanchez are some of the bigger names. Gardner Minshew as well. That Julian Blackmon, Zach Moss, the big ones that I think you have to make a decision on this year. Obviously, Pittman is number 1 in terms of intrigue, whether you 100%. Sign him and Chris Ballard wants to sign him. Undeniably wants to sign him. You get that from him talking to him. I think Pittman would very much like to test the open market because the market for wide receivers is great.
Going to get paid.
Exactly.
He knows he's going to get paid a lot of money, probably more than what the franchise tag would give him from some team, probably, or about the same, I guess.
And the franchise tag is what, $23 million right there for a wide receiver. So he's the most intriguing for sure. Whether the Colts use the franchise tag, we will see. Chris Ballard did not say one way or the other. I think that they will try to get a deal done, Matt, with Pittman, and if they can't do it, they will franchise tag him because they cannot let him walk. They can't do it.
I think the Atlanta game, you hate to just take one game and look at it like that, but when they found out that they weren't going to have Pittman the day before that game because he'd cleared concussion protocol, then went back into it, we saw what that team was like when they did not have him out there, and it was one of their worst performances of the season. They've got to have Pitt back.
Yeah, and the most dynamic receivers in this draft are going to be gone by 15 when the Colts would not pick. We'll just say that for the next couple months. But the guys like Harrison and Roma Duze and Malik Neighbors, like they're going to be gone in the top 10. And the best thing that could happen for the Colts, honestly, at this draft, and for any team that's picking in the 10 to 20 range, is teams fall in love with quarterbacks.
Right, just a big run on quarterbacks would help some of these teams that would want to get an edge rusher or a wide receiver.
Exactly. So think about that even right now. Start saying your prayers that Michael Penix Jr. shines at the Combine, that Jalen Daniels wows at the Combine, because you think right now that you're going to have Caleb Williams and Drake May in the top 5 for sure. But you look at the other guys, and all it takes is one team, Matt. All it takes is one team to fall in love with you. We saw it with Daniel Jones, and he was a guy that was mocked in the late first round for much of that pre-draft process, or in the second round. And then toward the draft, you started seeing him creep into the top 10 because there were whispers, and correct whispers, that some teams, or a team specifically in the Giants, were really, really liking him. So that's what you want. You want one team. That's all you need, especially a team that's already in the top 10 that doesn't have to sell an arm and a leg to get up there, to fall in love with some of these quarterbacks. You want Seattle to get someone that they love. You want Atlanta to find someone that they love. Obviously, there are other teams like the Commanders that are up there, like the Patriots that are up there, and the Bears. You would love to see all those teams. There's 5 teams that are rounded off right there. Fall in love with a quarterback in this draft and want to take someone in this draft. And that just pushes the cream of the crop, the other players, down a little bit more. And the Colts sitting at 15 could benefit from that.
Yeah, and that's kind of what they're going to have to hope for. If people want the Colts to select a difference maker at 15 and stick at 15, which is not necessarily the MO of the GM, then that's what it's going to be required. I saw a clickbaity headline the other day that was like, here's what it would take for the Colts to get Marvin Harrison Jr.
Stop.
And I didn't even click on it because I'm like, this is garbage.
No.
There's just no way at the position that they're at that they're going to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, pipe dream. It would be a Colts fan's fantasy to get Marvin Jr. here. And it would be,
here's how we can do it, guys.
Exactly. Yeah, give up everything. Trade Anthony Richardson. Send Jonathan Taylor. But it's just not. It's just not going to happen.
We'll send you DeForest Buckner,
Yeah.
Jonathan Taylor, and Anthony Richardson, and our next 2 first-round picks for Marvin Harrison Jr.
Out of this list of free agents, who do you think is the most intriguing, Matt, outside of Michael Pittman Jr.? I think there's a lot of names that you could go with. Like I said, I think I lean toward Grover, but you can make an argument Kenny Moore. You can make an argument Gardner Minshew, Julian Blackmon, even Zach Moss, I think, even though I think you might lean some of those other guys. Who do you think is the most intriguing choice out of all of them?
I keep coming back to Julian Blackmon because we saw what he's able to do when he's healthy, but that is such a big asterisk on his career because we've seen him with a couple season-ending injuries just in his short career here with the Colts. But, man, when he's out there, he's able to make such plays. So you have to wonder, are other teams going to be kind of shying away from that? Is that going to allow the Colts to retain him? Or is that something that the other teams are going to see it the same way that I do, that this guy can be dynamic? We should go out and get him. And does that mean the Colts are going to have to pay to keep him?
I think Blackmon this year is kind of like Michael Pittman Jr. light in the fact that who else do you have right now?
Yes.
Because you have some other guys, obviously. I mean, you have other receivers if you're the Colts. And like we've talked about Alex Smith. We've talked about that we really like Josh Downs. There's other guys back there that can play, but there's no one on the level of Pittman. Safety, I think it's very similar. Like you have Rodney Thomas, who showed some promise his rookie year, and this year maybe took a step back. You have Ronnie Harrison, who's played in the NFL for a while. You have Nick Cross, who you have optimism for in the future. That's why you traded up to get him if you're Chris Ballard in the draft a couple years ago as a young guy that you probably knew that he was going to take some time to develop into who you thought he was going to be. But none of them are playing at the level Julian Blackmon is. So they're in a place, like I said, that's like a Michael Pittman Jr. light, that there's no one else back there right now. So if you want to bring back someone, like he's the guy that you want back there, maybe there's more flexibility. You can maybe go out and get a safety in free agency if you just are not as interested in Julian Blackmon. But at the same time, like if you go out and get someone in free agency, you're trying to get him like I don't know how much better you'll do unless you want to pay big money at safety, which you don't pay big money at safety typically.
Unless they were to luck out and find somebody like not specifically, but a player like a Rodney McLeod that they kind of lucked into. They brought a veteran in. He ended up being super productive for them, and they've done that a couple of times.
Mike Adams, perfect example.
Exactly. You can't rely on that's going to be able to work out for you.
Right. Maybe you go down that avenue again, but it just adds a little bit of volatility in there, I think. So I think that's certainly an intriguing choice. Zach Moss will be intriguing too, because you don't pay for running backs in the NFL typically. So, I mean, he rushed for 740 yards this year. I think teams will be interested in bringing him in. But I don't know what his value is going to be to them. Like I said, you don't pay often for running backs unless they're as dynamic as a Jonathan Taylor or a Christian McCaffrey or an Alvin Kamara. Guys like that get some paydays eventually. But other than that, you don't get big paydays. And for Zach Moss, he might want to go to a place where he will get more carries, because if he gets a 1-2 year contract, whatever it is, you want to, as a running back, keep cashing in on contracts as long as you can, because that life is short in the NFL. Mm-hmm. So if you stay here behind Jonathan Taylor, you are very much option number 2. And you're not going to get the same opportunities you would get elsewhere to be a guy that's more of a number 1, or at least a 1A alongside someone else. So I could very much understand why Zach Moss would not want to be here. But at the same time, he was very productive here, and he's behind a good offensive line here.
And I guess that decision may come back a little bit to what do they think of Trey Sermon as well, because he flashed a little bit as their third-string guy this year. They may think that he's kind of the discount option on Zach Moss, and that they don't necessarily need to spend the outlay, as you mentioned, for another running back.
Kenny Moore, I think that you tried to re-sign Kenny Moore.
I think you can.
Absolutely.
If you can. Absolutely.
He's still one of the best nickels in the NFL, I believe. And
he finally, last year was a real struggle for Kenny. He admitted it.
Yep.
He didn't really know what his role was in the defense. Well, this year he knew what his role was, and he excelled at it this year.
Yep. And that speaks to a good player. I mean, that you were learning one way. You were learning the Matt Eberflus system for years, and you excelled in that. And then you get thrown into something else, and you struggle. And it's easy to go in the tank there. Kind of what I was talking about with with coaches earlier. Like if you fall down and you're starting to struggle in this area, and easy to get caught up in that and just try to jump out elsewhere if you're a player and go back to what you're familiar with. Well, Kenny didn't do that. Kenny really put in the work this past offseason. You could see it with his production on the field. It was evident because he was more effective, 100%, and was not quite the same levels that we saw in 2021 when he was a Pro Bowl player, but much, much better than we saw from him in 2022.
And also, we've talked about it all season, our concerns about the secondary, the talent, the lack of experience that is there. It is a very difficult sell for me to think that this secondary can get any better if you take away their veteran presence of Kenny Moore there at nickel.
Tyquan Lewis is intriguing because he's had a couple years here, and he finally was healthy this year.
And just a great rotational player.
Yep, a great rotational player. But do you, if you're the Colts at 15, want to try for someone more dynamic to fill into that spot in the rotation?
I think the answer is we're going to trade down and get 2 second-round picks.
Yep.
But I'm joking. I think if they do think that they can get somebody at 15, they probably will.
Right. A lot of this, like I said, depends on who they take at 15, but then it makes it just weird because free agency is first. So Tyquan Lewis, great rotational player. Is that enough to get another contract? We'll see. Rigo Sanchez, I think he was the only punter in the league without a touchback this year, which is saying something incredible.
Yeah, and he wasn't great in the early part of the season, but he's also coming back from a devastating injury.
Yeah.
So, but by the time we got to the midway point of the season and toward the end, man, Rigo was Rigo.
And Chris Ballard pointed out when he was asked post-season press conference about Rigo, also added he's a great holder. And that's important. Like really important. You don't want to mess with that system. And especially when you invested so much in Matt Gay as your free agent kicker that you just signed last year. So I would be stunned, absolutely stunned, if the Colts did not bring Rigo Sanchez back. Gardner Minshew. Gardner wants to be a quarterback. He wants to play. And might he get the opportunity here if Anthony Richardson is hurt again? Yes. but I think he wants to go somewhere with more of an opportunity if it's completely up to him. Now, is there another NFL team that wants to give him that opportunity? We will see. Based on this year, he let it would have gone, I think, a long way for him if the Colts had gotten in the playoffs.
If they could have just gotten over that hump there and won that last game.
Gone a long way for him, I think, in terms of his negotiations and his agent's negotiations with other teams. Being like, I led a team to the playoffs.
Yeah, we got a playoff quarterback right here.
Exactly. No, well, now he's not a playoff quarterback, and which speaks to somewhat the silliness of that type of results-based judgment, I guess, because he's still the same quarterback, whether the Colts won that game or not, but they just didn't. So, the whole team didn't win that game. It wasn't just on his shoulders. But and you guys talked plenty about last week and just the failed 4th and 1 and all that and his role in that and his strengths, his weaknesses for the entire season. So I don't feel like we need to dive into that play specifically and all that. But he certainly provides a value to the Colts. You undoubtedly you want someone there like they had with Matt Hasselbeck who could come in for years if Andrew Luck was banged up. And I think the Colts need to realize that. And Chris Ballard needs to realize this, that you can't just go into next year with Sam Ehlinger as your backup quarterback. And you have to make a decision about what you want to do with Ehlinger. I think he's still under contract for 2 more years, for one more year with his rookie deal. But you need to have a viable backup quarterback, because you could be in a situation like this where one game really matters at the end of your year, and you have a quarterback who plays a physical style of football who has a much more chance of getting hurt than other quarterbacks in the NFL do. You just do. So that's a position that if Chris Ballard hasn't realized yet that he needs a strong backup quarterback that you can rely on to get a win and come in and be effective, then I don't know what he's doing as GM. Like you need to have a reliable backup quarterback. Gardner Minshew certainly has that. I think it depends on what interest he gets from other teams, whether he will be back here in the future.
Because there is a multiverse where Anthony Richardson plays the rest of the season, but he misses a couple of games, but Gardner wins those games, and that helps propel the Colts into the playoffs and shows his value in kind of a different way. If let's say when they beat the Ravens,
perfect example.
In that game, Richardson was not able to play. Minshew comes in. He was not great in that game, but they won the game. And, maybe that's kind of where his role goes. I think, we talked, there were just a scad of backup quarterbacks that got their shots this year because of injuries and necessity and teams being a little bit thin on maybe having a quality backup, that sort of thing. I think some teams are going to take a good look at Gardner because, yes, you're not going to get a dynamic playmaking guy, but you're going to get a steady guy. And some of those teams that had a guy go down would have loved to have had him under center this year. But we'll have to see what the market says.
The other unrestricted Colts free agents this year, defensive tackle Taven Bryan, who was a fine rotational piece, I thought. Isaiah McKenzie, wide receiver, who was suspended for the last 3 games of the season. So very much, I would think, could be out the door. Defensive end Jake Martin, defensive end Jannard Avery, wide receiver Juwan Winfrey. And then some restricted free agents, Jack Anderson, the guard, Henry Black, safety, Danny Pinter, Ball State, chirp, guard, cornerback Tony Brown, who has already been waived.
So he's a restricted free agent, but it doesn't matter because
he's already gone, which was also in the Isaiah McKenzie 3-game suspension at the end of the year. The Colts have signed some players to 1-year extensions or reserve future contracts. I think the biggest names in that group, Trevor Denbo, who's been a special teams player for a long time, Cam McGrone, the Lawrence Central linebacker, who's also a special teams player for him this year, Saguna Luby, who saw some rep this year at linebacker, and Darrell Baker Jr., a cornerback, signed to a 1-year extension as well. And the guys that they signed to reserve future contracts are a bunch of guys that we know their names and we've seen them, but guys who have really never seen much or if any of the field.
A lot of practice squad all-stars that we see guys get put back and forth between the main roster and the practice team.
Right. So in terms of the NFL draft and free agency, we've touched on it. The Colts are locked into the 15th pick. We'll talk about that plenty in the coming weeks. The draft is scheduled for April 25th through the 27th in Detroit. Not a far drive here for Colts fans. Could be fun to go up there there and check it out. February 20th is when you can start designating players with a franchise or transition tag, and that goes until March 5th. March 11th and 12th through the 13th, unrestricted free agent negotiations can begin, that little legal tampering period.
Legal tampering. How about
everybody
that?
loves legal tampering. March 13th at 4 p.m. is when the new league year starts, and you can officially sign players. April 15th is OTAs. May 2nd is first-round picks. We didn't get the combine in here, but of course that's always in February right here in Indianapolis. Always a good time here in the Circle City. And so May 2nd, deadline to exercise first-round fifth-year option. So
I thought I had combine in there, but you're right. I left it off.
Shame on you,
Good
Matt.
job.
Graciously.
Good job, producer Matt.
Yeah, seriously. Joe would never have forgotten the combine.
No, he wouldn't
have.
have.
Because that would have been our lead, and that's all we were talking about.
You would have done 15 weeks of combine coverage, Dave.
Good times.
Miss you, Joe. Love you.
Mm-hmm. Likewise. We'll get into a lot more topics in the coming weeks. So, I think that we've reached our limit here this week's Colts Blue Zone podcast, as we kind of gave just a primer of the very bare bones basics of the foundation of what we're looking at in this offseason. And we'll get into, I think, areas that we think the Colts should improve. In coming weeks, we'll talk about next year's opponents and schedule that we know so far. But and of course, there's always something that seems to pop up, news of the week that we can dissect, and we'll get Mike Chappell back in the future, and we might be moving to Wednesdays just for our loyal listeners for throughout this offseason. We'll see exactly what comes, but whether it's going to be Wednesday or Thursday, you can always count on us to come back every week and give you some Colts content here in podcast form. So we appreciate you listening. For Matt Adams and Mike Chappell, I'm Dave Griffiths. We'll see you next week on the Colts Blue Zone podcast.